Hi there, and welcome to Steps Together, the Steps for Development podcast, where we come together to learn and build our own skills so we can help the children in our lives to thrive and succeed. I'm your host, Deb Johnson, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're a parent, an educator, a child care provider, a healthcare professional like myself, or maybe a family member or friend of a neurodivergent child, or really any child who is struggling, you're in the right place to learn about child development and behaviors and how those differences make our children unique, not less. Here, you'll learn about the why behind behaviors, what you can do to make a difference, and how you can advocate and support all children as you become empowered with tools and skills that bring lasting change. On today's episode, I want to talk about self-regulation and, more importantly, the strategy of co-regulation and just how very important that is to supporting children's growth and development so they can learn the skills that are needed in order to regulate their own behavior. Now, if you're here, you have probably more than once had a moment where your child was completely melting down, and no matter what you said or what you did, it only made things worse. I'll share with you a story from my own personal experience with one of my children a couple decades ago as he was navigating sensory sensitivities and a little bit of anxiety about school and social things. We would have huge meltdowns in the morning where the socks didn't feel right and socks and shoes were just never going to get on his feet. And my initial response was to kind of invalidate his feelings and tell him, this is not a big deal. These socks are okay. And I might make an effort to, switch the socks and say, here, try these. And then I would start to get frustrated and angry and I'd start yelling and we were late for school. And it was the, 27th time this had happened. So none of that obviously was effective. And I'm sure you can relate to that. You've probably had similar experiences. What I have learned over the years is that what works better is to co-regulate. And that means first finding my calm and then staying in that calm space while I help my child navigate those big feelings, navigate the challenges that are causing the outburst or the meltdown. Now, overwhelmingly, my approach is to help you eliminate these outbursts and meltdowns. I want you to learn how to be proactive in that co-regulation so that outbursts don't happen. Today, we're going to talk, though, about what do you do in that moment? How do you help your child to regulate when they do become dysregulated? What is it that makes a difference? And that difference is you. If you've been listening to some of my podcasts, you might start seeing a pattern here because I keep saying the difference is you. And so that's where we're going to start. That co-regulation is how we use our calm, our nervous system regulation to help a child remain regulated or return to a calm state. Co-regulation has both an emotional and a physiological component to it. We often think about co-regulation as just being, oh, I need to be in a calm mood. But you also have to have what we often tell kids to have, which is a calm body. If your body is not calm and relaxed, if you're not breathing regularly and your heart rate is more normal, your child is going to sense that. They're going to sense that escalation in your nervous system. So it isn't just about emotional expression. And maybe sometimes as parents, we put on a mask and we try to act like we're calm. But I can guarantee you, as my son used to say, he could totally see that I was upset, even if my words were trying to say something else. The physiological component is really important to recognize because again, you can't always just talk a child down emotionally or demonstrate an emotional response. And I want to give you an example of just how I experienced the physical component of co-regulation. When my youngest child was about 2 days old, she was exhibiting some, what I thought were abnormal breathing patterns. She was breathing very rapidly, almost with like a panting kind of pattern, like a ha, 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 and super fast. And I freaked out and I called the doctor. And, I'll never forget the doctor said, relax. She just started breathing a couple days ago. I mean, like I said, she was only 2 days old. She's like, this whole breathing thing is new to her, and her nervous system needs to learn how to breathe properly. So, the advice my doctor gave me was to put her on my chest, skin to skin, and just breathe. Just relax and breathe normally so that her breath would sync with mine. I was blown away when it worked. And it's just such a wonderful example, I think, of how important it is that we pay attention to our own body, our own breathing, our own heart rate, right? That we stay calm and regulated, not only with those emotional responses, but with our physical responses. So, where does this dysregulation come from? It comes from a part of our brain called the limbic system. And you may have heard of this if you've been listening to other podcasts or getting other information, right, from OTs or counselors about self regulation. We talk a lot about the limbic system. It's this emotional alarm system in the brain. There are some analogies out there about how the limbic system is like the barking dog, the guard dog in your brain, right? While your cerebral cortex, your thinking brain, those frontal lobes of your brain, those are the parts of your brain that we call the wise owl, right? They're the thinking parts of the brain. The limbic system is composed of several different parts of your brain. It lies deep inside your brain, and it's kind of the relay station in between your brain stem, which controls heart rate and your breathing and your digestion and your level of alertness, and your cerebral cortex, which is up above, and that's your thinking brain. So the limbic system sits right there in the middle, and it kind of consolidates everything, brings things together. Um, and its job is to keep you safe. It's to create perceptions and memories and store emotions linked with perceptions. And its main purpose is to tell you when there's a threat. The problem is when our limbic system gets it wrong, right? One of the parts of your limbic system is called your amygdala. And I often say, your amygdala can sometimes just get it wrong. It overreacts. It perceives a threat when a threat's not there. We'll talk more about that in other podcasts. But I want you to understand that the limbic system is responsible for 4 different responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So when we have a child who's in, or anybody who's in a fight response, you are seeing typically anger. You're seeing tantrums, meltdowns, outbursts, aggressive behavior, right? Fight. When they are in flight, they are in shutdown, right? They're running away. They're they don't want to interact with anything. They're going to be in an avoidance type of a response, right? Sometimes they're literally running away, right? We call that elopement in therapy, where they're literally just leaving the room or running out of the house. The next one is called freeze. And the freeze response is when there's a literal shutting down, like a paralysis, deer in the headlights look, an inability to respond. And then the last response is called fawning. And when we're in a fawn response, we become people pleasers. We want to try to avoid conflict. We want everything to be okay. And until recently, I didn't even realize young children could go into this fawning response. And then I heard about fawning presenting in young children as acting silly, going into baby talk, trying to be cute, right? And that makes sense, doesn't it? Those are the children that they don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They think they might be in trouble. So all of a sudden they're going to talk like a baby, or they're going to just try to be, super cute so that like you shift your attention and now you're just laughing because they're making you laugh. They're being funny and cute. So, what makes our limbic system react like this? Why do we have these fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses? It happens because our brain perceives a threat. Whether that threat is real or not is irrelevant to our brain. If our brain has learned that, for example, handwriting is threatening, right? We don't like it. It's hard. It makes us feel bad about ourselves. We get yelled at when we're trying to do it. We feel all kinds of pressure and stress and anxiety about it. Then presenting a handwriting activity in school or during homework time is potentially going to trigger this limbic system response in your child. What's really interesting about our limbic system responses is that functional MRI studies that have been done on individuals experiencing trauma, this trauma response is a limbic system response. When they are experiencing trauma responses and their brains are being actively scanned, what was found was that the limbic system lights up, right? Lights up like a Christmas tree. That's what an fMRI does. It shows all this electrical activity. And the language centers of the brain went dark, which means the individual is not processing language. They're probably not able to talk, and they're probably not able to process what you're saying to them. And this is really important to understand as a normal physiological response. It's a normal brain response when we are experiencing a traumatic event or response. So think of your own time, think of some times when you yourself were dysregulated. I like to give examples like you received some really horrible news, right? Or maybe you suffered a really significant tragedy or a loss, right? Those kinds of things, or something that you were just like unprepared for, some event that just came out of the blue and was shocking. That will generally send us as adults into a limbic system response. And I want you to think about a time that you, as an adult, experienced that kind of limbic system response, right? Maybe somebody close to you passed away. Maybe you were in a car accident. Maybe you experienced a natural disaster, right? Your home was hit by a tornado or something. It doesn't even have to be something as horrific as any of those things, but you would have gone into a state where you could not really think rationally or respond in a rational manner. And no matter what anybody said to you, it wasn't really helping. It wasn't calming you down. You were at what I call the peak of that modulation mountain. You were just 5 out of 5. And there's no way that you were going to process anything. So I want you to think of that next time your child is escalating. Think about your own experience, because that helps you to relate and connect to your child's experience. The other thing I want you to remember about a limbic system response is that for children, these responses are developmentally normal, right? There is a developmental progression to our skill development for self-regulation. In my Behavior Primer podcast, I talk about how the frontal lobes go through a normal developmental process. We aren't born with the capacity to regulate our emotions or to make sense of the world around us. That cerebral cortex part of our brain is the last part to develop. the frontal lobes where we analyze information and we are able to do top-down reasoning to tell our limbic system, relax, you're not in danger. That is the last part of our brain that develops. So we have to remember that these kinds of nervous system responses are developmentally appropriate. And what they need, what they require is us as adults to guide the child through that process so they can learn how to cope and how to manage. So let's talk a little bit about why, when kids are dysregulated, traditional methods don't work, right? Because we very often resort to the things that we were taught, right? Maybe we experienced them as children ourselves. Maybe a well-meaning counselor or therapist has advised you to do certain things like timeouts or sticker charts, reward systems, consequences like taking things away, maybe even 1, 2, 3 magic. I'm going to count to 3, and then you better, comply, kind of things. So why don't those work? Those are very often called traditional behavior management strategies. And they're rooted in this idea that we can control the behavior of another person by putting enough pressure or motivation, positive or negative, and that somehow is going to force the child to engage in the desired behavior and then learn that they need to do something different the next time. Now, from a purely behaviorist approach, this might sometimes be effective. The problem is that it stimulates the limbic system responses. And then we might actually end up with a child who is living in a heightened state of limbic system response because they're just always on edge about how are they supposed to respond? How are they supposed to behave? Are they going to do the right thing? And then we get behaviors that are fear-driven and threat-driven, and they are no longer driven by intrinsic motivation and altruistic cooperation or motivation to connect and engage with people. We are now then seeing behaviors that are just survival based, right? The child is just doing what they've been told to do or directed to do out of fear. They're just trying to survive. And a brain that is in that state is not what we say in OT is not a ready state for learning, right? A ready state for learning is, if you've ever used zones of regulation, it's the green zone, right? It's the ready state of arousal, which means your limbic system is calm and relaxed, and it's ready to learn. You're able to pay attention. Your brain is not being hijacked by emotional responses, and you're not going into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And you're ready to receive and to process and to learn. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't set boundaries. It doesn't mean that consequences are always bad. It doesn't mean that sticker charts are never going to work. It just means that we need to be conscious and aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and when, if ever, do we want to use it. And that's where the problem-solving piece of my approach comes in, that we're able to really discriminate what do we want to do when. So instead of asking, how do I get them to stop this behavior when a child is at that 5 out of 5 meltdown, I want you to start asking yourself, what's happening for this child right now? What is this child experiencing? I want you to go to a point of empathy and understanding, not to become some sort of pushover, soft kind of parent, but to become educated and empowered that you can meet your child's needs through a science-based, neurological, brain-aligned, if you will, parenting style that recognizes why they're dysregulated and leads them to learn how to stay regulated themselves. That's the heart of co-regulation. You're asking yourself, what's going on in this child's body and their brain? What can I do to support their need for safety? Because remember, I said a limbic system response is a brain driven by a need for safety. How do I help them feel safe? How do we together return to calm? And how can I connect and lead, right? Before I go down the road of correcting or processing, right? I see so many parents make that mistake. They're trying to process the choice. They're trying to get their child to understand the rationale. And, you've probably seen it. And if you're like me, you've done it. You're in the middle of Walmart and you're trying to reason with a toddler or even an older child having that meltdown in the middle of the store. Again, the language centers have gone dark and they don't have the frontal lobe development in order to be able to process your logic, your rationale, your top-down thinking. You need to connect with them on an emotional, physiological basis on that level, and then lead them to that regulated state. So here's what we're going to do when that child is feeling so dysregulated, right? Here are some things that you can do, right? You're going to stay focused and regulated yourself, right? Hang on to these things that when a child is dysregulated, they cannot calm down alone. It's just not going to happen. They need a regulated adult because that's developmentally appropriate. You need to remember that the focus is on safety, that it's our job as the adults to ensure that that little child feels safe and secure. And it may take time for them to get to that point where they feel it. I want you to not focus on fixing the behavior. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to fix the fact that they're screaming. We're trying to regulate their limbic system so they stop screaming eventually, right? And last, remember that you just cannot logic a child out of a meltdown. It's just not going to work. You just can't talk them out of it. You got to meet them where they're at, connect with them, and then bring them out. So what are some strategies, right? Enough about all that background. I know what you came here for is the strategies. What do we do about it? One of the most powerful tools that I have found, and it's super powerful, and it's hard to do as a parent, very hard. I have a hard time doing it as a parent when I'm in that role. I can do it as a therapist, but it's hard as a parent. And that is this idea of what is therapeutically called holding space or silent presence. Just being present, staying nearby, and offering calm, nonverbal support. You can probably tell I like to talk. I'm doing a podcast. It's hard for me not to talk when somebody else is struggling because I want to fix it. I want to make it right. And we all want to do that for our kids. Holding space requires so much growth on our part as an adult. It means we have to be comfortable with allowing another person in our presence to have and express a big emotion, right? We don't want them to be sad. We don't want them to be upset. We don't want them to be angry, right? We want that behavior to stop. That's what's driving our behaviors. So we have to consciously override that. And the most powerful tool, again, is just this concept of silent presence or holding space. You can then progress to maybe using a few words, right? And I want you to keep in mind these, you need to be very brief. And what you say needs to be a calming phrase. So that phrase might be something like, I'm here. I know. It's okay. You're safe. And it needs to be said consistently with a calm manner, right? Maybe you're going to validate. I know it's hard. It's hard when we have to leave the park. I know. I know you're so sad. You know, it's okay to label the emotions. That's a good way for the child to start pairing the name of the emotion with what they're feeling, or at least what they're expressing, because we don't always know if the outward behavior is accurately reflecting what they're feeling. I've had children screaming at the top of their lungs, and when I say you're angry, they argue and you know, they correct me, not argue, they correct me, and they say, no, I'm not angry, I'm sad. And they don't understand that they're expressing their sadness in that anger. And I just interpreted it and labeled it as anger. But, you know, God love them for correcting me and telling me that, no, I'm not angry, I'm sad. So you can use those kinds of phrases, but they need to be very brief, just a few words and the same words, right? I know, I know, right? And not invalidating. Please do not use words like, it's fine, it's okay, we're going to be all, or it's all good, or it's not a big deal, right? It's okay in and of itself is probably okay to say. But if you're saying it's okay because their toy broke, they're going to misinterpret that, because it isn't okay that their toy broke. So it's better to say, I know it's sad. Your toy is broken. If you want to see a really great example of holding space and just listening and validating feelings, I am going to encourage you to pull up Inside Out, that animated movie, Inside Out. There is a scene where Bing Bong is super, super sad because a toy went over the cliff and was being destroyed. And sadness comforts him. And she does it by just listening. It is a wonderful scene. So go find it. And by all means, watch Inside Out if you haven't lately, and watch Inside Out too when it comes to managing feelings and regulation. All right, what's another strategy that you can use? Breathing. But here's the challenge. I don't want you to demand regulated breathing when your child is in a 5 out of 5. No language, no direction. You are just modeling it the way I modeled it for my 2-day-old infant, right? I held her close and I just did the breathing. That's what you need to do. If you can hold your child, that's wonderful. It works even better if you can get close so that their little body is touching yours and they can feel the rhythm of your regular breath, of your heartbeat. But if you can't, then you can just model the breathing. You can even just do deep breaths and deep exhales. But again, no direction, no demands for participation, especially when they're in that 5 out of 5 level. As they start to come down, and maybe they're on the other side of that mountain, maybe they're a 4, right? And they're starting to kind of slow their breath, and they're not as angry, and they're not crying as hard. Then you might be able to offer them a few words of breathe with me. Let's breathe together. But when they're in the peak of that meltdown, don't use words, just model the breath. As they come down off that mountain, right, you could start offering some movement or sensory tools. If you're able to hold your child during a meltdown, you might be able to, say, rock gently with them, or pull a weighted blanket over them, or maybe you can transition them to walking. Maybe you could take them outside or something like that. That can be very helpful for redirecting the limbic system, right? Any kind of redirection off of this response can be very helpful with movement or sensory tools of some kind. And if they're aggressive, I want you to hold those boundaries with warmth. I want you to confidently say, I won't let you hit. I am here. I'll stay close. I'll help you. You're safe. I won't let you hit, right? So that you're not encouraging that. If the child is trying to hit, see if you can get something for their hands to do, right? Something that's safe. In a pinch one time, in the middle of an anger outburst in the clinic, I had a child that was trying to like pull everything off the shelves. And I really was flustered. I wasn't sure what to do in this moment, but I grabbed a tissue box and I pulled it in front of the child. I pushed it in front of the child and I said, here, grab these. And I started grabbing the tissues, modeling. And he followed me. He followed my model. And he started yanking the tissues, and he pulled out the entire box of tissues, one after the other, made a huge pile of Kleenex tissues on the side. And when it was all done, he looked at it and he said, I made a mess. And I said, it's okay. I said, that was when you were angry. And this 4-year-old child said to me, that was a lot of angry. And I said, yeah, it really was. Can you help me clean up the angry? And he did. He helped me, and we put the tissues in the trash. So I held the space for him, but I held boundaries. I didn't allow the child to trash the room. And I gave this child something different to use for venting all that anger. So maybe that could work for you sometime. Now, what do we do in these moments when we're trying to use some of these strategies that I've just gone through, but we ourselves are dysregulated, right? What do we do when we're trying so hard to use these strategies, but they're just not working? So here's some of the common challenges. One is that we're dysregulated. We ourselves are dysregulated. And we're going to talk about this more in depth on another podcast, but you have to have some go-to strategies and tools for yourself. You have to regulate yourself first. If you have the ability to sort of tag team and tap out with another adult where you can take turns, that's amazing. If it's just you alone, maybe you need to take deep breaths yourself. Maybe you need to physically separate 2 to 3, 4, 5 feet away and just kind of breathe. Maybe you need to turn away. Maybe you yourself need to put in earplugs or wear headphones because of the yelling and the screaming. Sometimes our children's behaviors trigger our own sensory responses. And again, we'll talk more in depth about this on a future podcast because it is so very crucial, that self-care and knowing what to do for ourselves. It's what I call putting on your own oxygen mask first, right? It's put on your oxygen mask first so that then you can help your child. Another common challenge is that the strategies don't work right away, or that they feel like they only work on a hit or miss basis. Please don't despair about that. Your ability to use the strategies is going to improve over time. It takes practice. Practice means using them. It means processing for yourself. How did that work? Did it work? Did it not work? What could I do better next time? Right? Again, we're going to talk about this on some future podcasts, and it's part of what I do in one-on-one parent coaching is walking you through that process of what went wrong, what went right, how can we make it better? This is the part where you are building your skills. So please use these strategies and use them over and over again and practice, practice, practice. And then the last challenge I usually hear about from parents is that they feel as though they are giving in, that they're being a pushover, and nothing could be further from the truth. Here's the phrase that I used with my own dad when he expressed to me that I was giving in to my children. Because I was working hard to avoid power struggles. And so I would allow my kids some control, and I was allowing my kids to make choices. And I might say no, and then my child would say, well, why not? And then I was trying to be mature enough to say, oh, yeah, why not? And so sometimes I changed my mind. And my dad said, why are you such a pushover? Now, to be fair, sometimes I was a pushover. But at that time, what I was trying to do was to consciously meet my child's needs. And if you can say that what you're trying to do is help your child feel safe and help your child learn how to regulate, and that what you're trying to do is understand your child better and meet their needs, that's not giving in. And I am not saying that you should give in. I'm not saying you should be a doormat. There is a huge difference between co-regulation, changing your responses, and changing or eliminating structure and boundaries. Those are two completely different things. I am not suggesting that you eliminate boundaries or that you throw away structure. Not by any way, shape, or form am I suggesting that. All right, let's wrap this up. Key takeaways from today. Connection is the key to co-regulation. You need to meet them where they're at. You need to empathize with what's going on inside that child's body. You need to set aside your own dysregulation, manage that dysregulation, set aside your anger, set aside your reactions so that you can be a better responder to your child. Number 2, co-regulation is a learned skill. It is a developmental skill that your child has to learn, right? Learning how to regulate themselves. And you need to learn how to regulate yourself. And then you are learning how to co-regulate with your child. Give yourself time. Give yourself time to practice. Give yourself grace to get it wrong. And give yourself the confidence, right? The boost that you can try again and that it can be successful. Know that you're not doing it wrong if it doesn't work right away. Practice, practice, practice. All right. So, what can you do today to take this forward? I want you to just start noticing as your child is escalating. What is happening to them? Do you see the limbic system response coming? This is the step towards becoming proactive. I don't want you to wait until the meltdown is full blown, because at that point, now we really need a lot of skill and a lot of a lot of our own regulation. And I don't know if you're there yet. So if this is new to you, the thing I want to challenge you to do is to try to notice those signs in your child that the limbic system response is coming. All right? Just keep an eye out and make a note of what do they do before they completely explode. And as you start to see those patterns, maybe it's changes in their body language, maybe it's a change in their voice volume, they're escalating, maybe it's running away, right? Avoiding, maybe it's a shutdown response that you're noticing. As you're noticing those, write them down. And then when you feel like you understand some of those signals, when you're able to catch your child displaying one of those signals, I want you to practice a co-regulation strategy then, because that's when they're at about a 3 out of 5. They're not all the way up at a 5 out of 5, but they're at about a 3 out of 5. And what we want to do is catch them as they're ramping up, catch them as they're climbing the mountain, and bring them back down. See if you can do that for me. All right. I think it's time to wrap this up. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you like what you hear on this podcast, please spread the word, share the podcast, and encourage others to join us in learning how to help the kids we love so that these kids can grow and succeed. You know, you can follow me on social media, share links to my Facebook page. I'm on Instagram. These podcasts get uploaded to YouTube. On social media, you can find links to sign up for my newsletter. If you're not getting my newsletter, please take a moment, give me your email. You can even grab a PDF about reasons why bad behavior is not what you're really seeing. I personally think that that's a PDF that's wonderful to share with family members and babysitters and, you know, educators who just don't quite get your child. And when you sign up for my newsletter, you're going to stay informed on all the things that are coming down the road. I've got some great things in store for the future. And the newsletter will give you some tips and strategies and hopefully some encouragement right into your inbox each week. I don't send a lot of emails, so you don't have to worry about getting spammed. And if you've got some feedback for me, if you'd like to tell me how the podcast maybe has affected your life or changed what you're doing, or if there's topics you would like me to address on Steps Together, you know, comment, send me a DM on social media, reach out to me. And absolutely reach out to me if you'd like to connect. Maybe you're thinking some one-on-one support would be helpful. I would love to connect with you and show you how coaching might make a difference and help really take your skills to the next level. So thanks again for joining me today. I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.